All right, folks, how we doing today? So I wanted to come on here. My name is Sean Fleming. I'm with Wyotech. We are an automotive diesel and collision school. So we're just an option for you guys when you get out of high school. I want to come on here and talk to you guys about turbochargers, right? How to make our cars go fast. So today's lesson is going to be all about turbochargers and how they work, all right? So the first thing we're going to talk about is turbochargers. What are turbochargers? How do they work? What are some of the advantages of turbochargers, and what are the components that actually make these systems work, okay? How do they do their job? So here's a vehicle with a turbocharged system in it. This is a Nissan GTR, one of my favorite vehicles out there. I'm more of a muscle car guy, but it's kind of hard to say no to Japanese muscle over here. And then we have some internal components of turbochargers, some kind of just taking apart turbos, okay? So there is going to be an assignment with this lesson. I'm sorry, I'm going to do some more, but it's all right. It's 10 questions. And these are the fundamentals of turbocharged systems. So we're talking about what is the main purpose of a turbocharger? How fast do these things turn? What is the function of a blow-off valve? What is the function of a wastegate? Now, a lot of people get these confused, so don't you do that. How much energy does a turbocharger produce compared to how much does it use? Like, what's the efficiency of a turbocharger? Okay, what does an intercooler do? What do we call the different sides, the exhaust side and the intake side of a turbocharger? And what actually powers a turbocharger? What allows you to make all that extra power? So here is a short video of a turbocharger in action. Okay, this is pretty awesome engine there, making over 1,100 horsepower out of 6 cylinders. You guys see there, the exhaust system is glowing red hot because of all the air that turbocharger is pumping into that engine. Probably isn't actually getting quite as much fuel as it should be, but we're producing so much power to this motor that the exhaust is actually going to start glowing red hot. So these are pretty cool systems, okay? So, let me click through there. Okay, so what is a turbocharger? It's an air pump. It's a big air compressor. Well, it's actually kind of a small air compressor. Essentially, it's a free power device. Now, it does use a little bit of energy. A turbocharger is about 95% efficient. So if you produce 100 horsepower from a turbocharger, it only takes about 5 horsepower to run this thing. So they're super efficient. They're a really good device for blowing extra air into your engine. Now, I'm going to tell you this right now. A turbocharger by itself makes no power for you. So what it does is it supplies a bunch of extra air, a bunch of extra oxygen for your engine, so you can add extra fuel and then make more power, go faster, right? So that's what a turbocharger is. It is nothing more than an air pump, an air compressor. It's a leaf blower, okay? So the difference being is that a turbocharger is far more efficient than an air compressor or a leaf blower. It's actually powered off of the exhaust of your engine rather than its own internal combustion engine or electric motor. So we're going to scavenge leftover power that our engine produced but didn't actually use it to make the car go faster, and we're going to use it to blow air into our engine. Now let's talk about how that works, okay? So here's what happens. The exhaust is going to rush out of the engine, and instead of just going up the tailpipe, it's being wasted heat energy. What we're going to do is we're going to use that exhaust and that heat to spin a fan. We have a fan sitting there, kind of like a water wheel. Okay, a little more efficient than that, a little more extravagant. But as that air is rushing out, it's going to spin this wheel really fast. And that wheel is hooked by a metal shaft to another wheel. And that wheel is going to suck air in and blow it into the engine. Okay, so the intake side is called the compressor side. That's the side where we're actually going to take that air in and compress it and blow it into our engine. The exhaust side is called the turbine side. And the way I keep those kind of situated there, and the way I remember is I think of like a jet engine, right? A jet engine gets all that heat blowing out of the back, and that's the jet turbine. So I remember the turbine side is kind of the jet side, the side with all the heat on it. So the intake side is your compressor, and the exhaust side is your turbine. So here's a short video on how a turbocharger actually functions.
In theory, a turbo is simply a hot air pump that forces more air into the engine. With more air, the engine can generate power more efficiently, improving performance, reducing fuel consumption, and cutting emissions. The turbo is mounted in the exhaust system between the exhaust manifold and the exhaust pipe. As exhaust gas exits the engine, it drives the turbine, which turns the compressor, pulling in air and compressing it. Oil passes through the turbo, providing vital lubrication. In practice, the turbo is a highly efficient, complex piece of engineering built to tolerances of thousandths of a millimeter. It comprises a turbine and compressor connected by a shaft supported on a bearing system. The turbo is driven by the waste energy from the exhaust gas. The exhaust gas enters via the turbine housing, turns the turbine, and leaves through the exhaust outlet. Exhaust gas temperatures can reach 950 degrees C, which means that special high-temperature materials are needed for the turbine wheel and housing. The speed and load of the engine determines how fast the turbine wheel spins. With the engine at idle, the turbine spins at minimal speed. As more gas passes through the turbine housing, the turbine rotates faster. At full speed, the turbine wheel can rotate at up to 360,000 RPM. That's 6,000 revs per second. The compressor wheel is connected to the turbine by a forged steel shaft and is powered by the spinning turbine. Air is drawn into the compressor housing by the compressor wheel and is compressed as the blades spin at high velocity. The shape of the housing converts the high-velocity, low-pressure airstream into a low-velocity, high-pressure airstream at the outlet. Air enters the compressor at ambient temperature, but leaves it at up to 200 degrees C. As air temperature increases, its density decreases, which reduces power. So it's usually passed through a charge air cooler or intercooler, which uses air or water to cool the hot, high-pressure air.
All right, so there you go. You guys kind of see how a turbocharger works. Again, it's just air rushing past a fan, spins a wheel, it's hooked to another wheel, which sucks air in and blows it into your engine. Again, air by itself isn't going to make you more power. It might cause you more problems than good. You got to match that with fuel, but you get more air and fuel, get more power. That's the objective to high horsepower vehicles. So what are some advantages to turbochargers? Well, obviously you're going to make more power, right? You're going to get more air, more fuel. Now, there is a little bit of ambiguity here, right? Because just more air and just more fuel doesn't necessarily equate to more power. You have to get that air out of the engine. So balancing your turbocharger system is really important. You guys might hear about somebody saying turbo lag, right? It takes, you step on the gas, you have to wait a while for the turbo to kick in before you start going. That's not necessarily a bad thing, okay? That's one of the benefits of a turbocharger. If you have a little bit of turbo lag on a daily driver, car you drive every day, that's good, because you come to a stop sign, you take off on a stop sign like a normal human being, right? Not a 16 or 17-year-old, like a normal human being, and you're driving away and that turbo is not under load, you're not pumping much exhaust through it, you're not gonna make a bunch of boost, and it's gonna drive like a normal car. And then you go to get on the freeway and you mash throttle, right? You wanna get ahead of the car in front of you, and you floor it, and that turbo spools up. Now you have a turbocharged vehicle. It comes alive, and you can get that extra power. So the cool thing about turbo is it is kind of on-demand power. Okay, and it's basically free power. You're using waste energy that would just go out the tailpipe, right? If you measure the efficiency of something, the best way to do it is put your hand on it. Put your hand on your exhaust. If that exhaust is red hot and really, really warm, that is heat energy that's leaving your tailpipe and not pushing your pistons down. So we're going to scavenge some of that energy. We're going to take it and use it to blow extra air into our engine. So that is one of the huge advantages of turbochargers. Again, we're reusing energy that would otherwise be wasted. It's on-demand power. You don't have to have it all the time, which really increases our efficiency. And they sound pretty cool. Okay, and here's a little video of some pretty cool turbocharger sounds. money, it's pretty hard to beat the sound of a turbocharged engine, okay? Now, what is all that noise? Well, that whistling sound you're hearing is actually that turbo spinning 360,000 RPM, sucking in air and forcing into the engine. Okay, it's gonna make a whistling sound. But you hear those loud whooshes and booshes, and what is that? Okay, so here's how a turbocharger works. You have your turbocharger, okay, and it's gonna suck in air because the exhaust side is spinning the wheel, and it's gonna blow it into your engine. Well, that's great, but there's more to it than that. We need to limit how much boost pressure we're actually making. We don't want to just keep building boost and building pressure in our engine until, you know, forever, because then you're going to blow up your engine. What we have is we have what's called a wastegate, and the wastegate's job is to limit boost pressure. Now, on the left of your screen, you're going to see a turbo, and you see the up pipe. You see the piping, the turbocharger piping, feeding that turbocharger. And then you see the down pipe, and that's that pipe that comes down off the back of the turbo and goes out to your tailpipe. But in between, you see this weird pipe that kind of spans the gap. It bridges between the two. And on the top of that, you see a pod, and that's called your wastegate. Now, what happens is that pod has a vacuum line or a pressure line that goes to your intake manifold. So when you're going down the road and you're flooring, you're hauling butt down the freeway, and you come up to whatever your preset boost pressure is, right? I don't want to go above 25 pounds of boost. You get to 25 pounds of boost, and that boost pressure actually pushes on a little diaphragm, which pushes against the spring and opens a little doorway. So we're going to bypass our turbo. So instead of all of that exhaust rushing through the turbo, it's going to skip past the turbo and go right up the downpipe. What that's going to do is going to limit how fast the turbo can spin. Now, if you have a real high horsepower vehicle and you're producing a ton of boost and your wastegate's not quite big enough, what you'll get is actually boost creep, which is where your boost pressure will shoot up and you'll get to that 25 pounds of boost, and that wastegate will open, but it can't bypass enough boost. So you go, woo, 25 pounds, 26, 27, 28, 29. And that's where you'll see people start to like upgrade their wastegate, maybe even put a second wastegate on, just so they don't have that boost grip. So they can really limit their boost pressure. Again, we limit boost pressure by how much exhaust we feed the turbocharger. Now, the blow-off valve is what you see in the middle of your screen. And that's actually on the intake side of the turbo, just in front of your throttle plate. Now, a lot of people think this is for boost pressure regulation. And in some applications, they do use it for that. If you look at like the Ford EcoBoost, they actually kind of use that in conjunction with the wastegate. But its true purpose is something different entirely. If you imagine your turbo is spinning 360,000 RPM, right? It's spinning real fast. And you're going down the road, your throttle plate's open, right? You're floored. And you let off the shift. When you put in your clutch and let off that throttle plate or throttle pedal, and that plate stamps shut, all that boost pressure, boom, hits that throttle plate and actually sends a shockwave back to the turbo. So now your turbo is going 300+ thousand RPM, stops in an instant. That does two things. First of all, not real good for a turbocharger to go from spinning really, really fast to not at all. The other thing that happens is when you let off the clutch and you get back on the throttle, you open that throttle plate up, well, your turbo's not spinning. So you have to build exhaust to spin that turbo again. So every time you shift, you have turbo lag. So we don't like that. So this has a vacuum line that actually goes from the top of your waste or your blow-off valve to your intake manifold. So when you let off the throttle and that throttle plate slams shut, the pistons are still trying to pull in air and fuel. So you get vacuum over here. And that actually pulls on a diaphragm and opens your wastegate. So when that throttle plate slams shut, the wastegate opens to atmosphere. So all that boost pressure that hits that throttle plate goes whoosh and goes up to atmosphere. And that's that whoosh sound you hear every time somebody lets off the throttle. Again, it keeps our turbo spinning. It lets it free spin. So when we get back on the throttle, we have boost instantaneously. And it also keeps us from breaking our turbocharger. Now, the last thing you see on the screen on the right-hand side is your intercooler. Now, as we're compressing this air, right? Anytime we compress a fluid, whether it be a gas or a liquid, we're going to generate heat. Now, hot air is less dense than cold air, which means that our engine is getting less oxygen molecules. Less oxygen molecules equals less fuel we can add equals less go fast. So what we're going to do is we're going to cool that air charge down to get the most dense oxygen-rich environment we can. The other effect this has is when we're squeezing that air and fuel, if it gets too hot, boom, it blows up. We don't want air and fuel to blow up in our cylinder until we're ready for it. So we want a nice cool air charge. So when we squeeze that air and fuel, it lights on fire from our spark plug. We want a controlled burn, not a detonation. So the intercooler is very, very vital if you're running high boost applications. We want to cool that air charge down, get the most efficiency we can, and make sure we're not pre-detonating, because pre-detonation, that leads to broken pistons, snapped piston rings, blown head gaskets, and just a lack of power. So we use that intercool to really, really improve on the turbocharger system. So those are a couple of the really key components to a turbocharger system. And again, don't get the wastegate and the blow-off valve backwards. The blow-off valve, everybody throws a new blow-off valve on their turbocharged vehicle, and they think it makes more power. It doesn't. It sounds cool. It definitely sounds cool. But if you're running a factory application, you really don't need a new wastegate. Like I said, all it really does is make it sound cooler, all right? So here's a nice thing about turbochargers. You don't have to just run one. You can run as many turbochargers as you want. The Bugatti Veyron actually runs 4 turbochargers on its W16 motor. So this first one right in the middle of your screen is going to be a twin turbo system. Now, they do use these on some of your straight motors, like the Toyota Supra. You know, the 2JZ came stock with twin turbos. Typically, you're going to see a twin turbo system on a V-style engine, whether it be a V6 or a V8 or V10 or V12. You're going to see 2 turbochargers because it limits the amount of piping you have to do. You don't have to route your exhaust all the way around the back of the engine to feed the one turbo. Now you're going to run 2 smaller turbos typically. And again, it's just that the left bank has its own turbo, the right bank has its own turbo, and it makes it really clean. It also makes it look pretty cool. On the left, you're going to see a compound turbo. Now this is typically going to be used on a diesel application. There are some people in the gas world that use it, and I think it is, in my opinion, one of the coolest turbo systems there are. Essentially what you have is you have a small turbo. Now, when you talk about turbochargers and matching them to your system, it's really important to note that a small turbo is going to spin up very quickly. If you imagine the exhaust housing doesn't have a lot of space, so a little bit of exhaust can get that turbo wheel spinning very, very quickly. The problem is with an engine, if it can't poop, it can't eat. So if you can't get the exhaust out, it doesn't matter how much boost you make, it can't get the air into the cylinder. So a small turbo is great for making a ton of boost, but it has a lot of exhaust gas restriction, a lot of exhaust gas back pressure. So a small turbo is cool in that it spins up quickly, but it bogs down the motor on the top end. Whereas a big turbo will feed that motor on the top end, but has a lot of turbo lag. So in a compound system, what you're going to do is you're going to use a small turbo. The exhaust is going to rush through it. It's going to spin that small turbo up. And the boost pressure from that small turbo is actually going to help start up the bigger turbo. It's going to blow through the compressor housing and get that small turbo, or the bigger turbo, spinning. And then once that small turbo comes up to speed and it produces its boost, the wastegate opens and allows the majority of the exhaust gas to bypass that turbo, which means that you don't have that exhaust restriction anymore, which is killer because now the big turbo has all the exhaust it could possibly want, and it can take over and really propel the vehicle. So you get the benefits of a small turbo, right? Spool up quickly and get you off the line, and then the benefits of a big turbo to take over at those high RPM, high exhaust flows, and keep that vehicle moving down the road. A lot of times you'll see these systems running in, you know, a gas engine, 20, 30 PSI boost, 40. At Wyotech, we're actually building a Acura Integra GSR. It's making about 800 horsepower with about 35 pounds of boost. These compound turbos will run up into the 100 plus pounds of boost if you tune them right. So they're made for high boost applications. On the right, you see a twin compound turbo, where this vehicle actually has 2 small turbos feeding 2 large turbos. I don't know why you'd run this system. I think they look really cool. They probably sound amazing, but they're more for show and just saying like, yeah, look what I can build. But they are a killer system. They do look really, really cool. So you guys can see that in a compound system, you're gonna have at least 2 turbochargers. Sometimes there's 3 or even 4. In a twin turbo, again, 2 turbochargers. I've seen 4. Like I said, the Bugatti Veyron, it's a quad turbo. And then your compound twins, you're starting to get pretty extravagant with your arrangements. So again, turbochargers, just a big air compressor. It's going to run off the exhaust and blow air into the engine. Super efficient, a great way to make extra power on demand. They sound amazing, okay? So if you're thinking, what is the best power outer for my vehicle? Well, you have options. You do have options, but turbochargers, while they do require a lot of plumbing and piping, they are the most efficient option out there, okay? So again, here's your 10 questions. What is the main purpose of a turbocharger? How fast do they actually spin? What is the function of a blow-off valve? What is the function of a wastegate? Don't get those confused after this. How much energy produced by the turbocharger is needed to power the turbocharger? How efficient are they? What is the function of the intercooler? What do we call the exhaust side? What do we call the intake side? And what actually provides the power for our turbocharger? What makes it spin? Okay, so I'll give you guys a second. Look at these questions. Take a picture of them. Like I said, you might want to take a picture of them. I like to have these just for future reference. And I'd like to thank you guys. So check it out. My name is Sean Fleming. I'm the Arizona admissions rep for Wyotek. If you guys want to come to school and learn how these systems work, put your hands on some cars, install some turbochargers, and really learn how to work on auto, diesel, or collision, please reach out to me. If you're not in the Arizona area, go to wyotek.edu and find your local rep. We'd love to have you at school. All right, and thanks so much for your time. And you guys have a nice school year. All right, thanks.